Hi everyone. Today we have with us Dr. Marissa Lepper from Texas A&M. Hi Marissa, thank you so much for
Hi.
joining me for this conversation. We are very excited to hear what all the stuff that you've been doing so far. Um, my first question to you is, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, including a fun fact?
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk, and I think this series is just a really great thing that our field needs. But
Thank you so much.
so I do behavioral and experimental economics. I'm a third year assistant professor right now at Texas A&M in the agricultural economics department, but I'm affiliated with both the Human Behavior Lab and our financial planning program. And my research interests are, well, fairly broad, like I think most of us. But in general, I'd say a lot of it falls under intertemporal choice and self-control, and then also institutional design. So looking at ways that we could make companies more efficient, especially in evaluating worker performance. And a lot of this has to do with looking at information and how people respond to information. So outside of work, I'd say my fun fact is that I really, really love musicals. And I've actually been in Andrew Lloyd Webber's top 0.1% of listeners on Spotify for almost a decade, which I don't know if that says something about me or about his lack of popularity, but it's something that is fun. And we actually here in College Station have a I don't want to say surprisingly good, but I was surprised, but it's a really good high quality like local theater scene. And so that's something that I think is really fun to do.
Very nice, fascinating. I've watched a few theater musicals and they are nice. There was the one with it's very famous. I think it's called The Producers or something by Mel
Yeah, where
Brooks.
they are trying to kill the show, and so they start adding all the crazy elements to it. Is that
I think so. It was a long time ago. I watched it in grad school and it was amazing. I had so much fun. So I can completely understand the appeal of musicals.
nice
Awesome.
little escapism?
Absolutely. Can you share with us, what sparked your interest in experimental and behavioral economics?
Yeah, so I've always been really interested in human behavior and figuring out why people do what they do. And so in undergrad, that led me to start with psychology.
Mhm.
And so I was a psych major. I worked in a social psychology lab, and that's what I thought I was going to study. And then I ended up my second semester junior year. So started a little late. I took an intro micro course because I heard of game theory and I wanted to try that. And I basically just fell in love. Like I've just really liked the economic way of thought and the way that it describes all of the behaviors and looking at trade-offs. And so I ended up taking an experimental and behavioral course in undergrad, and our professor had us pick a topic to lead the class on, and I picked intertemporal choice. And I remember doing it an hour later from Donahue and Rabin, and just being like, "This is what I want to think about for the rest of my life." And I started going down, the rabbit hole and reading all these papers on procrastination. And I was struggling to get through some of them, especially the theory sections, but I just thought it was so interesting. And I really liked the way that experiments were able to just parsimoniously test a lot of these theories of human behaviors and the ways that it described it. So that ended up changing the trajectory of of what I wanted to do.
I love that, especially the part you say about, having a little bit of a struggle with the theory section, because, oh my God, that is just like so me.
Yeah, and going
And
through it without the math, and you're just like, this sounds like it's saying something really cool.
exactly. And I will say this though, I've been reading a few experimental papers recently, and it fascinates me that when I was a junior scholar, when I got hold of like an interesting experimental paper, then I would jump to the design section to find out what they were doing. But now I'm kind of like, oh, I want to know what kind of literature they are citing and what the literature
Yeah.
is. And it just struck me that, the way in which I interact with these papers is kind of changed over time, which was a realization for me. It's probably unrelated to what you were saying, but that part about reading papers and being fascinated by the work.
That's always the fun thing when you start looking at new topics or get back into topics and all of a sudden you're like, what else has been done? What's going on? What have I missed? And
Exactly, exactly. You
which
just
of these other papers can I add to a tab that I
Yes,
couldn't get read
absolutely.
there?
Absolutely. Yeah, you read my mind on that one. Um, my next question is, what is one of the most fulfilling aspects of your career so far?
I think it's really the community of people that I've met and keep meeting. I think such a fun part of what we do is just being surrounded by people that you could talk to that are curious and that you
Mhm.
could bounce ideas off of. And so, you know, meeting people who give a seminar, going to conferences, even just having colleagues and grad students and being able to sit down and when you're curious about something, talk to people and either have them say like, oh yeah, this has been looked at, and then you get to read those papers, or be like, well, what could we do? How could we think about that? So I feel like that's just a really, I mean, it's just really fulfilling to be part of this. And I think experimentalists I have a theory that I think that we're very collegial because we need each other to test our experiments and read through all of our instructions. Since um, compared to applied micro, by the time we run our experiment, it has to basically all be perfect, which is not to say that applied micro people are not collegiate either, but I just really enjoy having an atmosphere of people to talk to and think about economics.
Yeah, yes, and you are very right about, having your colleagues, your friends, go through and read your instructions because so many things become clear and evident.
Yep.
And
And you don't want to be presenting your results and someone points out a confound and now you have data that's
I know
just completely wrong. That's
exactly, exactly. Yeah. Um, can you describe one project that you are currently working on, which you are very excited about, and something surprising that you have, learned from it?
so one of the projects that I'm really excited about is excuse-based procrastination. Um, and this, I find that people avoid information about the consequences of their future actions as an excuse to prioritize their current self.
Mm-hmm.
So you could think about this as maybe someone who's living paycheck to paycheck and they want to go out with their friends at the end of the month. And if they knew they didn't have enough money in their bank account and they'd overdraft, they'd stay home, but they could just not check and go out and have fun guilt-free. Or someone who likes to sleep in, but they have to go out to work on time. And if they knew there's a storm and traffic, they'd set their alarm early and wake up, but instead they could not check the weather and sleep in guilt-free. So basically, the main idea is that we feel bad when we do something that we know is bad for us, unless we could justify it. And I look at it, I use a survey and a lab experiment. And so the survey provides evidence of this mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
And this emotional cost of procrastination is something that's not found in current models of procrastination and self-control, but it's really important because it's going to be something that impacts when and why you procrastinate. It's also important for welfare considerations, since forcing people to not procrastinate may end up having this additional disutility if you're adding on to this emotional cost. And so in the lab experiment, I use a longitudinal experiment, so it's a fairly stylized environment where participants come into the lab and they choose between how much work to do now and how much to do later. And so they're doing a transcription task where it's a little painful, but they have blurry Greek tasks. So this is from a lot of papers with Ned Augenblick. He's used this task, and you have to press it. And in some decisions, they have full information between how much work they'd have to do now and later in their choices. And in these, I find people are incredibly patient. And so they completely prioritize picking whatever option will minimize overall work, even if it
Mhm.
means doing more now. And I have an excuse treatment where I give them an excuse in the form of the ability to remain willfully ignorant. So the mapping between current and future work is uncertain, but they could costlessly resolve this.
Ah.
Um, so if your preferences differ by state, so I guess one thing I miss is there's two states of the world, one where your preferences align and the same option minimizes current and future, one where it's the opposite, where one option minimizes current work, but at the expense of doing more in the future. If your preferences differ by state, you should reveal the information. But even though 96% of people in the full information make different choices, a third of them avoid learning the state and they use that to instead pick the one that's immediately helpful, which leads to a fourfold increase in impatient behavior. And so I think this is interesting since it's a preference reversal, and we think of people of having this demand for this information that's going to help them out. And we think of in a revealed preference sense, when we see this decision they make, we could make some assumptions about their preferences from that. Like, okay, this person chose to be patient here, but I'm showing this novel environmental factor that's going to change someone's behavior in the same scenario where the only difference is an optional excuse. And so this isn't just ex post rationalization of impatient behavior, but instead actually changing what they do. I also think it's really important because it shows that when we're measuring or interpreting time preferences,
Mhm.
we have to we have to consider what the decision-making environment is. And so you can't
Absolutely.
necessarily take what they do in one environment and, extend it to something else. So when I compare it to other measures of discount factors found, I find that my participants look more patient than, say, a convex time budget when there's full information, but they look a lot less when there's this excuse. So the environment that you're using to measure preferences is going to matter a lot.
Awesome. I will say this, it is very evident that you are so excited about your research and so passionate about it, and you are able to explain it and convey it so nicely. So that's a
You.
win for sure. Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Oh, it's
I like
true.
this project. It's,
Awesome, awesome. Looking ahead, what do you think are some of the most exciting things to look forward to in the next 10 to 15 years in this area, like in generally in experimental and behavioral econ or intertemporal choice? You pick.
yeah, so I think this kind of applies to both, but I think one of the next big things is going to be focusing a lot more on the why than the what. So I feel like with behavioral economics, it kind of started as, so I'm going to look back before I look ahead, but it
Mhm.
kind of started as let's identify and document some violation of the predictions from the neoclassical model. And then I think it kind of moved into like, okay, how can we update our models and how to incorporate this? And I think now is going to move more forward into, well, what's actually going on that's leading to these. So not just documenting the behavior. So just as an example for intertemporal choice, you can think about this where it started by saying people show time inconsistent preferences. Neoclassical model says the only thing that should matter is the distance between two decisions. And people found the violation that you appear a lot more impatient when you're making a decision between now and later versus later and later. And then the second part was updating models for like hyperbolic discounting, where you
Right.
have this immediate discount and doing things like structural modeling to try to parameterize beta and delta and showing that this works. But what I see going on a little bit now, and I think is going to continue a lot, is trying to say, well, why do people present bias? And so there's some really cool research looking at, how uncertainty about the future impacts it. So I know how I feel now, but In the
Absolutely.
future, I'm not sure, and connecting it to things like projection bias.
Mhm.
And I think this is really interesting since, well, personally, I just have an inherent curiosity about behavior, but also in general, I think it helps a lot with external validity, which is a critique we get. So when you
Yeah.
understand the why, it makes it easier to see how this will extend outside of maybe a stylized environment. And it provides a bit more nuance. So you see papers where it's like, okay, well, we see present bias here, but we don't see it here. What's going on?
Hmm.
If we kind of understand what's going on in the background, we could say, well, yeah, it makes sense. We don't see it here because people have more experience or they
That's
learn
right.
or things like that. And I think for policy, it's also useful because you're trying to figure out how to debias something, or even if we should be paternalistic and debias something, understanding what's actually going on is going to help target that. And we'll also understand where policy might be most effective because we'll get better at predicting where some of these biases may happen. Um,
Hmm.
and so I think methodologically to get at this, I kind of think there's three big things that will continue to catch on. And so one is using choice process data, which, quick plug for the human behavior lab here, where we have, a lot of the state of the art eye tracking and EEG and
Sure.
facial recognition. But I think that this is going very useful for looking at decision-making processes and trying to get on what's going on and even connecting biases across different behavior that we observe to try to get at underlying things.
Hmm.
I also see people becoming more and more open to incorporating surveys and qualitative data. So instead of just relying on you do this in an experiment,
Right.
the thing is like let's talk to see how the people are actually doing. So,
Right.
for example, like I have a project looking at labor market and looking at promotion decisions, and something that I've been talking to my co-authors about is incorporating surveys where we actually talk to managers. So not just asking our participants, how do you make this decision in our stylized manager experiment in the lab, but also how would a manager make a decision? Or I have a paper on debt repayment decisions. And so we ran a survey where we asked financially distressed borrowers, how do you make decisions when you have two types of debt you need to decide to reply? So I think that that's something that's really important. If we're trying to say this is how people make decisions, we should be asking the people who are making the decisions how they do it. And again, I think this helps with external validity, where you could
Yep.
say what they're doing aligns with what they report doing. Um,
Absolutely.
and finally, I think that there's going to be a big emphasis on causal mediation, so running treatments to try to identify some of the mechanisms instead of focusing on correlations from surveys. So I feel like surveys will be used more as a qualitative analysis instead of something that's controlled for or looked at that way, and people will instead try to design it. But I think all of these will also be really cool because I think it could breathe some light into fields where before people might think we've done all we could do. Like we've looked a lot at intertemporal choice, we've looked a lot at charitable giving and other regarding preferences. But if what we've mostly been doing is documenting behavior, it's fun to go back and say, okay, but like, why is this going on and how are these related to each other? And so I feel
Right.
like it's just a really fun frontier moving forward.
Yeah, and this is the second time you're mentioning about the combination of surveys and experiments, and I find that to be very innovative. I have, and also self-serving in some sense that I occupy, operate in both
Yeah.
domains. And so that makes me very excited about the work that I have an opportunity to do in the future.
Well, I think that it's really cool to have seen your work and you're saying like you've been doing the surveys for a while and like a lab, but it's really fun to actually see on what people are thinking. Like I
Oh,
feel like it's a
yes.
really good and way to even marry some of these labs with what's going on without necessarily having to run a full-scale randomized control trial field experiment, like using
Hmm.
these
That's
surveys.
right. Absolutely. Great. Um, we all have areas where we can improve. Can you share with the audience something that you are actively working on to address?
Yeah, so my interest in procrastination isn't just academic. It's it's something, that's inspired by a true story. My friend who works on housing used to joke that whenever I need a new research topic, I just have to do some self-reflection and be able to pick something up. But it's definitely something that I've struggled with, trying to figure out how to keep on track and how to prioritize. And so I sometimes find myself doing what I like to call productive procrastination, where I'm still working, but it's not necessarily on the the big things or the most it might be something that needs to get done sooner, but isn't necessarily the best thing. And so I think some of the nice things about thinking about it for research has helped me be self-reflective and try to identify even some of the environmental triggers and what I'm going through. So, if something it seems like too big of a task to try to break it down into smaller
Right.
tasks, or if I feel like I have too much going on, try to actually build it up into bigger tasks and
Mhm.
keeping track of what I do. So I keep track of my time in 15-minute increments to try to make sure that I'm not spending too much time on teaching or on service or anything like that. And I try to be good about setting goals, but I think the thing that's helped me the most is being honest with my co-authors and using them as a commitment device. And so being like, can we set up a weekly meeting or a bi-weekly meeting just to check in? And so that way it's on my calendar and it's not just me saying like, okay, I will send you the
Yeah.
updates to the drafts when I get it done. It's like, okay, in 2 weeks we're meeting. And even if I haven't gotten everything done, we'll talk about like what has been done and what needs to be done. And it's on my calendar. So I feel more beholden to you than I do for myself.
Yeah, first of all, I love what you said about what productive procrastination. I feel I was doing that this morning. But I just appreciate your honesty in sharing this with us, as well as the fact that, you are trying to make you are in the pursuit of efficiency. You're so structured. And I just, yeah, when you were saying sharing all of this, I was thinking, oh yeah, yeah, I really need to tell her this, and now all of that's gone out the window. But I appreciate you, sharing this largely because of the fact that, and this is true for me, when I see a researcher, I see their CVs on their website or their profile, I'm just thinking of them as a researcher, which is fine. But behind the researcher is the person, and the person actually has to do the things to,
Yeah.
in a way, to effectively deliver on the different things that they're doing. So in that sense, taking advantage of all kinds of tools, whatever they might be, to get the work done
Yeah.
is
And
is
yourself on track. And I think
exactly.
with our jobs, like, the great thing is we have a lot of flexibility, but then the tough thing is we have a lot of flexibility. And
I know, exactly. It's double-edged sword. Um, Looking back to your past work and interactions, if you could redo something, uh, what could that be? What would that be?
I think that big thing is if I go back, I try to keep in mind that perfection is the enemy of finished. And so I think I spent a lot of time, particularly in grad school, not seeking feedback or not submitting a
Mhm.
paper that should have been submitted because I always felt like there's something more that I needed to get done. So if I could go back, I think it'd be trying to get things done quicker, which wouldn't necessarily mean working more hours or working on it harder, but being better at figuring out when the marginal benefit of spending more time working on it outweighs the marginal cost of, working on something else or even taking a night off and relaxing or anything like that. But it's just so easy to get tied up on both. I mean, always feeling like there's something more to do, but also dealing with the fact that when you're sending it out, you're opening yourself up for
Hmm.
rejection. And you're both, at least for me, you want to reduce the probability of it getting rejected, but also push off the time until you get rejected. And
True,
so,
true. Absolutely, absolutely. And this, when I came to give the seminar to your department, I said that, I am making myself available to you for you to provide any kind of comments because I'd rather get them now
yes.
than in a like a rejection from a
Yes.
journalist.
Yeah.
And it's taken me a while to get used to that. That this, like the immediate feedback is, I take that over anything coming later from
Yeah.
reviewers.
And you need the feedback early
Uh-huh.
on. Like if you wait for something to be perfect, first it'll never be perfect, but also you can make it better so much quicker with your talking to people and getting the
Absolutely.
feedback.
Absolutely. You are so right. Um, Looking back, what is something that you wish someone had told you when you started out as a young professional?
The big thing is that everyone is figuring things out as they go.
Yeah.
Um, so it's like you're just saying when you look at someone's CV, you see what they've done and you don't see all of the work that's gone in behind it. And I think you don't see all of the rejections that they've gotten, all of the grants
Mhm.
they applied to, they didn't get. The fact they had to submit this paper to multiple journals, or the fact that they wish they had submitted it earlier and they didn't, the struggles with balancing time. But I think from talking to a lot of people, we all deal with the same thing and we all deal with the growing pains, especially the moving from a grad student to assistant faculty where you have a lot more on your plate and a lot more flexibility. A lot of people I've talked to, self included, it took some time to try to get used to how to balance that. And it's not just, it was useful. I found afterwards talking to people, people were saying, I felt that too. But at the time, I couldn't help but feeling like I was the only person who was having this struggle. So just I what I would tell any junior faculty watching this or grad students and what I wish I'd been told before was just, keep going. It's part of the process. And just, you know, keep remember why you got into this and the fact that you're not alone in feeling this way. And as you keep working on it, things are going to fall into place and you're going to figure out basically how you could manage everything to the best that you can manage it.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, my next to final, almost final question is there a new activity or a role or something that you are looking forward to pursuing anytime?
So something that I'm excited about as I get more senior would be to work more with grad students and advise grad students more. So we have some grad students that I've started working on with as more of a, I guess, unofficial mentorship role, but I think it's just really exciting to be able to see basically the future of our field. And I feel like grad students have really interesting perspectives because when you're seeing something for the first time, you see it with new eyes and you're able to think of things in a new
Mhm.
paradigm or see connections between things. And so it's really fun to hear what they have to say, and to help them grow into scholars. And I also am very thankful for all the mentorship I've had in my career. So it's a nice feeling to go and be able to pass that on. So I'm excited to be able to kind of, as I get, like I said, as I get more scholars, as I get more senior, start working and advising grad students more.
And to the point about unofficial mentoring, I think mentoring is mentoring, and I've seen you interact with the graduate students in the human behavior lab, and I see that to be really beneficial for them, and by that association to to you too. So you're kind of like already there, so to speak.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's awesome.
I appreciate it.
Of course. Well, I am telling the truth for the audience. I'm not just saying stuff because, Marissa is our guest today. That is the otherwise I wouldn't have mentioned it. Let's just put it that way. So my final question is, are you open to be, approached by other researchers wanting to collaborate or just to interact with you? And if yes, how would you like that to happen?
Yeah, so I'm definitely open. So, like I said, people are probably one of the most fulfilling things, and it's so fun to meet new people. And I feel like everyone you meet makes you think about things in a slightly different way. So,
Mhm.
I'm happy to meet people if we're ever at the same conference, or if people want to send me an email and we could chat or anything like that. So, I think that collaboration is one of the really important and fun things about our jobs.
You're absolutely right. On that very positive note, thank you so much for joining us for today's conversation and sharing a part of, your work and your individual personality with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Awesome, awesome. Bye-bye.
Bye.